In the tapestry of Greek mythology, gods ruled the heavens and the earth, but it was the heroes who embodied the spirit of mortal striving. They were men and women of extraordinary courage, often born of divine and human parentage, whose lives became an unending struggle between fate and choice, weakness and strength, mortality and the dream of immortality. Their deeds were told and retold across centuries, shaping not only the myths of Greece, but the very idea of what it means to be heroic. The Greeks believed that these figures lived in a time before their own, an age when mortals could still walk beside gods, face monsters of unimaginable terror, and journey into realms forbidden to ordinary men. Some heroes triumphed in battle, others in cunning, and still others through endurance and tragic sacrifice. They were not flawless. Indeed, their humanity was revealed through hubris, doubt, and suffering. Yet through their triumphs and tragedies, they left stories that would echo across the world. Among the many champions celebrated in myth, 10 stand above the rest, not only for their strength or cleverness, but for the enduring power of their legends. Heracles, the strongest of all; Perseus, the slayer of Medusa; Theseus, the champion of Athens; Jason, the questing leader of the Argonauts; Achilles, the unmatched warrior of Troy; Odysseus, the man of many turns; Bellerophon, the tamer of Pegasus; Orpheus, whose music defied even death; Atalanta, swift-footed and fearless; and Cadmus, the founder hero who gave Greece the gift of its alphabet. This is their story, a compendium of heroism from the ancient world, told in narrative form, so that their feats may live again in the imagination of those who hear them. Heracles was unlike any other hero the world had ever known. From the moment of his birth, it was clear that he carried the weight of destiny upon his broad shoulders. His mother, Alcmena, was a mortal queen, noble and beautiful. His father was Zeus, king of the gods, who had descended from Olympus to lie with her in secret. This union of divine and mortal blood gave the child strength beyond measure. Yet it also ignited a bitter hatred in Hera, the wife of Zeus, who could not endure the sight of her husband's infidelities made flesh. Even as an infant, Heracles faced the wrath of the Queen of Heaven. One night, Hera sent 2 serpents slithering into his crib, their fangs gleaming in the moonlight. Any other child would have perished, but the infant reached out with his chubby hands, seized each serpent by the neck, and strangled them with astonishing ease. When Alcmena and her household rushed in, they found the child laughing and playing with the lifeless snakes as though they were toys. From that night onward, it was clear that this child was destined for feats that would shake the earth. Heracles grew into a man of immense stature, towering over others, with muscles that seemed carved from stone. His spirit was bold, his will unyielding, yet his life was never free from sorrow. Hera's vengeance followed him relentlessly. In adulthood, she struck him with madness, and in his delirium he killed his beloved wife Megara and their children. When the madness passed, grief consumed him like a fire. He sought purification, and the oracle at Delphi gave him an answer both terrible and redemptive. He must serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae for 12 years, and perform whatever labors the king demanded. Only then could he find forgiveness, and only then would he achieve immortality. Thus began the 12 labors, the most legendary trials ever undertaken by man or demigod. The first task sent Heracles against the Nemean lion, a beast with golden fur that no weapon could pierce. Many hunters had tried to slay it, but none returned. Heracles tracked it to its lair and found its hide invulnerable to sword or spear. Realizing brute force was his only weapon, he grappled the lion in its cave, his massive arms locking around the creature's neck. The struggle shook the stones, but slowly, the beast's roars fell silent as Heracles squeezed the life from it. He skinned the lion with its own claws, and from then on wore its belt as a cloak, its gaping maw forming a hood that framed his head, making him appear as terrifying as any monster he had slain. His second labor was no easier, the slaying of the Lenaean Hydra. The serpent dwelt in a swamp and possessed many heads, each one venomous. Worse still, when one head was severed, two more sprouted in its place. With the help of his nephew Iolaus, Heracles devised a strategy. He would cut, and Iolaus would burn. As each head fell, the stump was scorched with a burning brand, preventing regrowth. At last, the immortal head remained, and Heracles severed it and buried it beneath a great rock, ensuring it would trouble the world no more. He dipped his arrows in its poisonous blood, giving himself weapons that no enemy could withstand. The third labor tested his endurance rather than his strength. To capture the Cyrenean hind, a sacred deer of Artemis, swift as the wind and untouchable by mortals. For a year, Heracles pursued the creature through forests, mountains, and rivers, until at last he caught it unharmed. When Artemis appeared in anger, Heracles explained that it was necessity, not hubris, that drove him. Satisfied with his respect, she allowed him to continue. The fourth labor brought him to the frozen slopes of Mount Erymanthos, where a monstrous boar ravaged the land. With great patience, Heracles chased it into deep snow where its strength failed. And there he bound it alive and carried it upon his shoulders, the beast squealing in vain against his iron grip. The fifth task was both humiliating and impossible: to clean the Augean stables in a single day. King Augeas possessed herds so vast that their filth had piled for decades. No man could hope to finish in time. But Heracles, cunning as well as strong, diverted two great rivers, and their rushing waters swept through the stables, cleansing them in mere hours. The sixth labor called for the destruction of the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with metallic feathers sharp as blades. Heracles received a rattle of bronze to startle them into flight, and once they filled the sky, he loosed his arrows, striking them down until the survivors fled forever. Next, he faced the Cretan bull, wild and untamable. Wrestling it to the ground, Heracles subdued it with sheer force and brought it back alive, its nostrils flaring and eyes blazing with fury. The eighth task demanded the capture of the man-eating mares of Diomedes. These beasts feasted on human flesh, and their master, Diomedes, was cruel and unyielding. Heracles overpowered him and fed him to his own mares, taming their hunger with poetic justice, then led them away in triumph. For his ninth labor, Heracles sailed to the land of the Amazons to retrieve the girdle of their queen, Hippolyta. At first, she welcomed him, impressed by his might. But Hera sowed discord, convincing the Amazons that Heracles meant to abduct their queen. Battle broke out, and Heracles slew Hippolyta and took the girdle. Though grief shadowed his victory, the 10th task was the most perilous yet: to seize the cattle of Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies fused together, who dwelled on an island at the edge of the world. Heracles slew Geryon with a single arrow dipped in Hydra's venom and drove the cattle across continents, defying countless dangers until he delivered them to Eurystheus. The 11th labor tested not only his strength but his endurance of temptation. Heracles was ordered to bring back the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by nymphs and a 100-headed dragon. On his journey, he freed the Titan Prometheus from his chains, and Prometheus advised him to seek help from Atlas, who bore the sky upon his shoulders. Heracles agreed to hold the heavens while Atlas fetched the apples, but when Atlas tried to leave him there, Heracles tricked him into resuming his burden. With the apples in hand, he returned victorious. The 12th and final labor led Heracles into the underworld itself. There, he confronted Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed hound who guarded the gates of Hades. With permission from the god of the dead, Heracles wrestled the beast into submission without weapons, dragging it up into the world of men before returning it to its dark domain. When the 12 labors ended, Heracles' legend was already unmatched. Yet his life did not end there. He fought in wars, slew giants, and aided the gods themselves. He freed Prometheus, battled river gods, and defended the world from chaos. But his life, so filled with glory, ended in tragedy. Deceived by a poisoned garment given to him by his wife Deianira, Heracles was consumed by unbearable agony as the venom burned his flesh. Knowing his end had come, he built his own funeral pyre upon Mount Oeta. As the flames consumed him, the gods themselves intervened. His mortal body perished, but his divine essence ascended to Olympus. There, he was welcomed among the immortals, reconciled at last with Hera, and granted eternal life as God. Thus Heracles, born of man and God, became the greatest of all heroes. His strength was legendary, his trials unmatched, and his redemption complete. He was the embodiment of courage, endurance, and triumph over suffering. The hero whose name would echo across all ages. Perseus, the slayer of monsters and founder of kingdoms, was a hero whose deeds rivaled those of the mightiest champions. Unlike Heracles, whose life was a tale of strength and suffering, Perseus' story was one of divine guidance, cunning, and courage in the face of impossible odds. His birth itself was wrapped in prophecy. King Achilles of Argos, fearful of an oracle that warned his daughter Danae would bear a son destined to kill him, locked her in a bronze chamber beneath the earth so no man could reach her. But Zeus, king of the gods, descended in the form of a golden shower that streamed through the roof. And from that union, Danae conceived a child. When Achilles discovered the infant, his terror grew. He dared not kill the boy for fear of divine punishment, but he cast Danae and the child into the sea within a wooden chest, leaving them to the mercy of the waves. Fate, however, had greater plans. The chest washed ashore upon the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman named Dictys rescued the mother and child. Perseus grew up strong and noble beneath the care of Dictys, unaware of the destiny that awaited him. But in time, danger returned. Polydectes, king of Seriphos and brother of Dictys, desired Danae for himself. Yet he saw in Perseus a barrier to his ambitions. To rid himself of the youth, Polydectes devised a cruel trick. He announced a feast at which every man must bring a gift fit for a king. Perseus, poor and without riches, could offer nothing. In pride and desperation, he declared he would bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon, whose very gaze turned men to stone. Polydectes seized upon his words and demanded he fulfill the boast, certain that Perseus would perish in the attempt. Thus began Perseus's great quest. Alone and without guidance, he would have failed, but the gods themselves favored him. Athena, goddess of wisdom, and Hermes, messenger of the gods, appeared to him. They guided him to the Graia, three ancient sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them. Perseus stole their eye and held it ransom until they revealed the location of the nymphs who possessed divine treasures. From these nymphs he received three gifts: winged sandals that carried him through the air, a cap of invisibility that could hide him from any foe, and a pouch to safely hold whatever he claimed. Hermes gave him a gleaming sword, sharp enough to cut through stone, while Athena gave him a polished shield whose surface shone like a mirror. Armed with these divine tools, Perseus journeyed to the edge of the world where the Gorgons dwelt. These monstrous sisters were terrifying beyond measure. Their skin was scaly, their teeth like tusks, and their hair a writhing mass of serpents. Of the three, only Medusa was mortal, and it was she whom Perseus sought. Finding them asleep, he crept near, holding his shield before him to avoid meeting Medusa's deadly gaze. Step by step he advanced, guided by the reflection upon the bronze surface, until at last he stood above her. With a single strike of Hermes' sword, he severed her head. From the gushing blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior of legend. Perseus placed the head in his pouch and fled as Medusa's immortal sisters awoke, shrieking in fury. But the helm of invisibility concealed him, and the winged sandals carried him beyond their reach. On his journey home, Perseus encountered another scene of tragedy. In the land of Ethiopia, he found a maiden chained to a rock beside the sea. She was Andromeda, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Her mother's pride had offended the gods, and as punishment, a sea monster had been sent to ravage their land. To appease it, Andromeda had been offered as sacrifice. Perseus, seeing her beauty and innocence, was moved to act. He descended upon the monster as it rose from the waves, striking it down with his sword and rescuing Andromeda from her chains. She became his bride, and together they journeyed onward. At last Perseus returned to Seriphos, where he found his mother still tormented by Polydectes. Entering the king's hall, he revealed the head of Medusa. At once, Polydectes and his companions were turned to stone, their faces frozen in terror. Perseus then made Dictys king in his brother's place, securing safety for his mother and honor for his foster father. Perseus's life, however, was not without tragedy. When he traveled to Argos, fate fulfilled the oracle's words. At the funeral games held in Larissa, Perseus competed in a discus throw. The disc slipped from his hand and struck a bystander, who fell dead. It was Achilles, his grandfather, the very man who had cast him into the sea. Thus the prophecy was fulfilled, not through malice, but through the inexorable hand of destiny. In time, Perseus founded great dynasties. He and Andromeda had many children, and their line would give rise to heroes of later ages, including Heracles himself. Perseus's deeds were celebrated not only for the monsters he slew, but for the kingdoms he established, the justice he brought, and the endurance of his name. Where Heracles embodied raw strength, Perseus showed the power of divine favor and cunning. His victory over Medusa was not won by force alone, but through the gifts of the gods and the wisdom to use them well. He was the slayer of monsters, the rescuer of maidens, the founder of dynasties, a hero whose story would inspire countless generations to come. Among the heroes of Greece, Theseus stands as both warrior and statesman, a figure whose deeds were as much about forging civilization as they were about slaying monsters. Where Heracles embodied brute strength and Perseus divine favor, Theseus represented the ideals of cunning, justice, and leadership. His story was woven not only with feats of valor, but also with the shaping of Athens into a city destined to lead the Greek world. Theseus was born of a mystery that gave him two fathers, Achilles, king of Athens, and Poseidon, lord of the sea. His mother, Aethra, daughter of King Pegasus of Troezen, was visited by both men in a single night. Thus Theseus came into the world bearing mortal nobility and divine power, his destiny lying between earth and sea. Before returning to Athens, Achilles left a great test for the boy. Beneath a massive stone, he hid a sword and sandals, instructing Aethra that when Theseus was strong enough to lift the stone, he should claim them and journey to Athens to take his rightful place. Years later, as the boy grew into a man of immense strength and bold spirit, he lifted the stone with ease and set forth on the road to Athens. The path he chose was not the easy sea route, but the dangerous overland journey, for he wished to prove his worth by facing the perils that plagued the land. Along the way, he encountered a series of fearsome bandits and monsters, each of whom he vanquished in turn, becoming a hero to the people long before he reached Athens. First was Perseus, the club bearer, who slew travelers with his iron weapon. Theseus wrested the club from him and killed him with it, making the weapon his own. Next came Sinis, the pine bender, who tied men to trees and tore them apart. Theseus turned the villain's cruelty upon him, binding him to the very pines he had used for murder. Then he faced the monstrous sow of Crommyon, a beast of enormous size and ferocity, which he slew with his sword. Farther along, he encountered Chiron, who forced travelers to wash his feet, then kicked them into the sea, where a monstrous turtle devoured them. Theseus seized him and hurled him into the waters, giving him to his own beast. Afterward came Cherchon, a cruel wrestler who killed men in contests of strength. Theseus, skilled in both brawn and technique, outmatched him and cast him down. Finally, he met Procrustes, the stretcher, who offered travelers a bed and then either stretched them or cut off their limbs to make them fit. Theseus repaid him in kind, making him fit his own cruel bed. By the time Theseus reached Athens, his name was already spoken with awe. But danger awaited him there as well. Achilles' new wife, Medea, the sorceress once beloved of Jason, feared that Theseus would displace her own children. She sought to poison him, but at the last moment, Achilles recognized the sword his son bore and dashed the cup away, embracing Theseus as his heir. Yet Theseus' greatest trial lay not in the bandits of the road or the intrigues of the court, but in the tribute Athens paid to Crete. Long ago, King Minos of Crete demanded that Athens send 7 young men and 7 maidens each year to be sacrificed to the Minotaur, a monstrous creature born of both man and bull, who dwelled in the twisting labyrinth beneath the Cretan palace. When the time came for the tribute, Theseus volunteered himself, vowing to end the horror once and for all. In Crete, he met Ariadne, daughter of Minos, who fell in love with him and gave him a means to navigate the labyrinth, a ball of thread to unravel behind him so he might find his way out. With courage and cunning, Theseus entered the dark maze, where the Minotaur waited with horns like spears and the body of a beast. They clashed in the shadows, man against monster, until Theseus at last drove his sword into the creature's heart. Guided by Ariadne's thread, he led the Athenian youths to freedom. Yet the tale did not end in triumph alone. Fleeing Crete, Theseus carried Ariadne with him, but on the island of Naxos he abandoned her, whether by choice or by command of the gods remains uncertain. From her grief, the god Dionysus claimed her as his immortal bride, but for Theseus, the act left a shadow upon his legacy. Returning home, Theseus suffered another tragedy. He had promised his father that if he lived, he would hoist white sails upon his ship, but in the joy or sorrow of his return, he forgot and left the sails black. Achilles, seeing them from the cliffs of Athens, believed his son dead and cast himself into the sea, which thereafter bore his name, the Aegean. Thus Theseus became king, but at the cost of his father's life. As king of Athens, Theseus was more than a warrior. He united the scattered villages of Attica into a single city-state, laying the foundations of Athenian democracy and power. His reign was remembered as a golden age, when law and order replaced chaos, and Athens began its rise toward glory. Still, Theseus's life was marked by further adventures and sorrows. He joined the Argonauts on their voyage, fought the wild centaurs alongside Pirithous at the wedding feast of Hippodamia, and even descended into the underworld in a reckless attempt to abduct Persephone. In that dark realm, he was trapped upon the chair of forgetfulness until Heracles himself came to free him. Theseus's end was not as glorious as his deeds. Exiled and betrayed, he fell from grace and met his death on the island of Skyros, where he was cast from a cliff. Yet even in death, Athens revered him as a founder, a lawgiver, and a hero whose deeds bridged the world of myth and the birth of civilization. Theseus stood not only as a slayer of monsters, but as a builder of cities. Not only a warrior, but a king. His courage cleared the land of threats. His cunning triumphed over the Minotaur, and his leadership forged Athens into the city that would shape the course of history. If Heracles embodied strength and Perseus divine guidance, Theseus embodied the spirit of humanity, striving to rise above chaos and forge a world of order. Among the heroes of Greece, few tales are as filled with wonder, peril, and betrayal as that of Jason, leader of the Argonauts and seeker of the Golden Fleece. His journey was not a tale of solitary strength like Heracles, nor of cunning heroism like Theseus, but of leadership, gathering a band of the greatest heroes of the age and guiding them on one of the most perilous quests ever undertaken. Jason's story began with a kingdom lost. He was the son of Aeson, rightful king of Iolcus in Thessaly. But Aeson's half-brother, the usurper Peleus, seized the throne, fearing a prophecy that warned him to beware a man who came to him with but a single sandal. To secure Jason's safety, Aeson sent him away to be raised by the wise centaur Chiron, who instructed him in music, healing, and the arts of war, as he had tutored so many other heroes. When Jason grew to manhood, He returned to Iolcus to claim his birthright. As fate decreed, while crossing a river, he lost one of his sandals, and so he came before Peleus, wearing only one, fulfilling the oracle's warning. Fearful, Peleus did not kill him outright, but instead set him an impossible task: to bring back the golden fleece from the distant land of Colchis, a prize guarded by gods, monsters, and kings. Jason accepted, and thus began the assembling of the Argonauts, a company of heroes whose names would echo through legend. Among them were Heracles, greatest of all men; Orpheus, whose music could charm even the stones; Castor and Polydeuces, the twin sons of Zeus; Atalanta, the swift-footed huntress, and many others whose fame would endure. They boarded a great ship called the Argo, crafted by the shipwright Argus under the guidance of Athena herself. Upon its prow was a piece of sacred oak from the oracle of Zeus at Dodona, and it could speak with the voice of the god. With Jason at their helm, the Argonauts set sail, embarking on a voyage filled with perils that tested the courage of all aboard. Their first challenge came in the land of Lemnos, where the women, cursed by Aphrodite, had slain their husbands. The Argonauts lingered there, forming bonds, until Heracles urged them onward. They next came to the land of the Doliones, where in a tragic twist they fought their own hosts in the night, killing their king unwittingly. At the cliffs of the Bosporus, they aided Phineus, a blind prophet tormented by the harpies who stole his food. The winged sons of Boreas, also Argonauts, drove the harpies away, and in gratitude, Phineus gave them counsel on how to pass the simple gates, the clashing rocks. These immense stones smashed together whenever a ship attempted to pass. Following his advice, they sent forth a dove. When it flew safely through, they rode with all their might, barely escaping as the rocks clashed behind them. Thereafter, the simple gates stood still, never again to move, for the Argonauts had triumphed. At last, they reached Colchis, where the golden fleece hung upon a sacred oak, guarded by a sleepless dragon. King Aias, ruler of Colchis, set Jason yet more impossible tasks before he could claim the prize. Jason was ordered to yoke fire-breathing bulls with hoofs of bronze and plow a field with them. Into the furrows he must sow the teeth of a dragon, from which an army of warriors would spring fully armed. Here, Jason's fate intertwined with Medea, daughter of Aeetes and priestess of Hecate. The gods inspired her heart with love for Jason, and she betrayed her own father to aid him. She gave him an ointment that made him impervious to fire and steel, and with her guidance, Jason tamed the bulls, plowed the field, and faced the earth-born warriors. Remembering Medea's counsel, he cast a stone among them, and in their confusion, they turned upon each other until none remained. Yet Aeetes still refused to yield the fleece. Under cover of night, Medea led Jason to the sacred grove where the golden treasure hung. There, before the massive dragon, she called upon her arts of sorcery. With her chants and potions, she lulled the beast into sleep, and Jason seized the fleece, gleaming with a light like the sun itself. With Medea at his side, he and the Argonauts fled Colchis, pursued by Aeetes and his forces. To delay them, Medea committed a deed both dreadful and tragic. She killed her own brother, Apsyrtus, scattering his remains upon the sea so that her father would be forced to stop and gather them. The voyage home was no less perilous. The Argo passed near the Isle of the Sirens, whose song lured sailors to their deaths. But Orpheus played his lyre with such beauty and strength that their voices were drowned, and the ship sailed safely past. In other lands, they faced storms, giants, and even the wrath of Talos, the bronze guardian of Crete, whom Medea destroyed with her sorcery by unsealing the vein of ichor that gave him life. When at last they returned to Iolcus, Jason presented the golden fleece to Peleus. But still, the usurper refused to relinquish the throne. Once more, Medea's cunning came into play. She deceived Peleus's daughters into killing their own father, promising to restore his youth if they cut him to pieces and boiled him in a cauldron. When Peleus was dead, Jason and Medea were forced into exile, and they came at last to Corinth. But here, the hero's tale turned bitter. Jason abandoned Medea to marry the daughter of the Corinthian king, seeking power and security. In vengeance, Medea struck down his new bride with poisoned gifts, and in her fury, slew her own children by Jason. Then she fled, leaving Jason broken and alone. Jason lived out his days in sorrow, a hero whose greatest triumph was shadowed by betrayal and loss. In the end, he died not in battle or glory, but quietly, crushed by a rotting beam of the very ship that had carried him to fame. Yet for all his tragic end, Jason's name endured. He was the leader of the Argonauts, the seeker of the Golden Fleece, the man who gathered the mightiest heroes of Greece into one company and led them across uncharted seas. His story spoke not only of triumph, but of the perils of ambition, the dangers of betrayal, and the fragile bond between love and power. Jason's glory lay not in strength alone, but in leadership. For no single hero could have faced the voyage of the Argo. He stood as the figure who bound them together, proving that sometimes the greatest feats are not achieved by one man's hand, but by the unity of many. Of all the heroes born in Greece, none blazed as brightly or as briefly as Achilles, the swift-footed warrior of the Trojan War. His name became a byword for both unmatched strength and unyielding wrath, his deeds immortalized in the songs of poets. Where Heracles triumphed over labors and Theseus forged a city, Achilles embodied the tragic glory of battle. A hero whose life was destined to end young, yet whose fame would never fade. Achilles was born of a union between mortal and divine. His father was Peleus, king of the Myrmidons, while his mother was Thetis, a sea goddess of extraordinary beauty. The gods themselves attended their wedding, though discord sowed by the goddess Ares would one day lead to the Trojan War. From the moment of his birth, Thetis sought to make her son immortal. Some say she anointed him with ambrosia and burned away his mortal flesh in fire. Others tell that she dipped him in the waters of the river Styx, holding him by his heel. Whatever the truth, Achilles was hardened against all harm, save for that small place left untouched. From his youth, he was tutored by the wise centaur Chiron, who taught him music, medicine, and the art of war. Yet fate soon called him to the greatest conflict of his age. When Paris of Troy stole Helen, queen of Sparta, from her husband Menelaus, the kings of Greece raised a mighty host to bring her back. The seer Calchas revealed that Troy could not fall without Achilles. But Thetis, knowing the doom that awaited her son, tried to hide him. She disguised him as a maiden and placed him among the daughters of King Lycomedes on the island of Skyros. Yet Odysseus, cunning beyond measure, discovered him by laying out gifts of weapons among trinkets. When Achilles reached for the sword, his nature was revealed and he joined the war. At Troy, Achilles shone brighter than all others. With his myrmidons at his side, he stormed the fields, scattering enemies like chaff before the wind. His spear struck down countless Trojans, and his very presence filled the Greeks with courage. No warrior could match him in speed or strength, and his wrath was like fire upon the plain. Yet his pride was as great as his valor. When Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks, insulted him by seizing the maiden Briseis, whom Achilles loved, the hero withdrew from battle in fury. Without him, the Greeks faltered, pressed hard by Hector and the Trojan host. The war dragged on, and despair gripped the Achaeans. At last, his dearest companion, Patroclus, could not endure the slaughter. He donned Achilles' armor and led the Myrmidons into battle, driving the Trojans back. But Hector, Prince of Troy, slew him, and the armor was stripped from his body. When word reached Achilles, grief and rage consumed him. His wrath, once turned against Agamemnon, now burned for Hector. Reconciled with the Greeks, Achilles returned to battle, his very presence terrible to behold. He was clad in new armor forged by the god Hephaestus, armor that shone with the light of the cosmos. With a cry that echoed like thunder, he charged the Trojan lines, slaughtering all before him. None could withstand his fury. He sought Hector alone, and when they met before the Scaean gate, Achilles gave chase. 3 times they circled the walls of Troy, until at last he caught him. With a spear thrust guided by Athena, he struck Hector down. Yet his vengeance did not end with Hector's death. Achilles bound the prince's body to his chariot and dragged it through the dust before the walls of Troy, defiling it in his wrath. But in time, the aged King Priam, Hector's father, came to the Greek camp guided by Hermes. Kneeling before Achilles, he kissed the hands that had slain his son and begged for the body. Moved by the old king's courage and grief, Achilles wept and returned the body, showing that even in his fury, he was not without mercy. But the shadow of fate drew ever nearer. Achilles had been warned by prophecy that he must choose between 2 destinies: a long, uneventful life or a brief life crowned with eternal glory. He chose the latter, and his death came swiftly after Hector's. Paris, guided by Apollo, loosed an arrow that struck Achilles in his one vulnerable spot, his heel. Thus the greatest warrior of the Greeks fell, and with him ended an age of unmatched heroism. Yet death did not silence his fame. The Greeks mourned him deeply, raising funeral games in his honor, and poets sang of his wrath and his glory. His very name became immortal, for Achilles was not remembered only as a warrior, but as the embodiment of the tragic hero, one who knew his fate and embraced it, choosing glory over life, and in so doing, achieved eternal remembrance. Achilles' tale is not of kingship or wisdom, but of the burning brilliance of valor and the cost of wrath. In him, the Greeks saw the noblest and most terrible truth of heroism: that greatness is often inseparable from destruction, and that the brightest flame burns the shortest. If Achilles embodied the fury of war and the strength of valor, Odysseus was the hero of cunning, endurance, and resilience. His fame was not forged by brute force, but by intellect and guile, and his greatest tale was not one of conquest, but of return. For while others sought glory in battle, Odysseus became the wanderer, tested not only by enemies in war, but by the long, perilous road home. Odysseus was king of Ithaca, a rugged island whose people were as hardy as their land. He was the son of Laertes and Anticlea, but his true power lay in his mind. His tongue was silver, his wit sharp, and his schemes were as deadly as any sword. When Helen was stolen away to Troy, Odysseus at first feigned madness to avoid joining the war, plowing his fields with salt. But Palamedes, suspecting deceit, placed Odysseus' infant son Telemachus before the plow. To save the child, Odysseus swerved, and thus his ruse was revealed. Bound by oath, he joined the host that sailed to Troy. During the long war, Odysseus proved indispensable. When Agamemnon faltered, Odysseus steadied him. When quarrels divided the Greeks, Odysseus' words restored unity. It was he who devised the stratagem of the Trojan horse, that hollow vessel of wood filled with warriors, by which Troy at last fell. Without Odysseus, the war might have stretched on without end. Yet his true legend began only after Troy was in ashes. For the gods, angered by the Greeks' pride, scattered the victors upon their journeys. And Odysseus, though favored by Athena, drew the enmity of Poseidon, lord of the sea, whom he had angered by blinding his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. Thus began the Odyssey, a journey of 10 years across seas filled with wonders and terrors. First, Odysseus and his men came to the land of the Lotus Eaters, where the fruit lulled sailors into forgetting home. He dragged his companions back to the ships, their mouths still yearning for the sweet taste of oblivion. He dragged them back, their mouths still yearning for the sweet taste of oblivion. Then they reached the cave of Polyphemus, the one-eyed giant who devoured men raw. Odysseus, with cunning, gave him wine to drink and named himself Nobody. When the Cyclops slept, he drove a sharpened stake into his eye. As the blinded giant cried for help, he could only say that nobody had hurt him, and thus no aid came. But when Odysseus fled, he could not resist taunting his foe with his true name. Polyphemus prayed to Poseidon for vengeance, and so the sea god became Odysseus's relentless enemy. From there, the wanderer's path was filled with marvels. He came to Aeolus, keeper of the winds, who gave him a bag holding every breeze. But his curious sailors, thinking a treasure, opened it, and the winds burst forth, blowing them far from Ithaca's shore. They faced the Lastrygonians, giants who devoured men and destroyed ships until only one vessel remained. On the Isle of Aea, the sorceress Circe transformed his men into swine. But Odysseus, aided by Hermes, resisted her spells. Winning her favor, he remained with her for a year until his men urged him onward. Circe sent him to the realm of the dead to seek prophecy from the shade of Tiresias. There, among the countless spirits, Odysseus spoke with his mother, who had died of grief in his absence, and with the fallen heroes of Troy. Tiresias warned him of hardships still to come, and the wrath of Poseidon that would dog his every step. Back upon the sea, Odysseus steered his ship past the sirens, whose song lured sailors to their doom. He stopped the ears of his men with the wax, but had himself bound to the mast, that he might hear their voices and yet survive. He passed between Scylla and Charybdis, the six-headed monster and the whirlpool, losing men to both. He landed upon the island of Helios, whose sacred cattle were forbidden, yet hunger drove his crew to slaughter them. In vengeance, Zeus struck the ship with a storm, and all were drowned, save Odysseus, who drifted alone upon the waves. At last, he washed ashore upon the Isle of Ogygia, where the nymph Calypso held him captive in her love for 7 long years. Though she offered him immortality, his heart longed for home, and he wept each day upon the shore. At last, by the decree of the gods, Calypso released him, and Odysseus built a raft to continue his journey. After further storms, he came at last to the land of the Phaeacians, where he told his story in full. Moved by his tale, they bore him home to Ithaca in secret, at last delivering him to the land he had not seen for 20 years. But even here, his trials were not done. In his absence, suitors had overrun his halls, feasting on his wealth and seeking to wed Penelope, his faithful wife. Disguised as a beggar, Odysseus entered his house, testing the loyalty of servants and the constancy of his queen. At last, he revealed himself by stringing his great bow, which none but he could bend, and with it he slaughtered the suitors in a storm of arrows, reclaiming his throne and his home. Odysseus' tale was not one of endless triumph, but of endurance through suffering. He faced gods and monsters, temptation and despair, yet he never surrendered his will to return. His greatness lay not only in his cunning, though that was unmatched, but in his unyielding spirit. If Achilles was the hero of wrath, Odysseus was the hero of perseverance. His story showed that victory is not only for the strongest arm, but also for the keenest mind and the most steadfast heart. In him, the Greeks saw the embodiment of resilience, a man who endured everything the world could throw at him, and by endurance alone, returned home to find his place once more. Long before the walls of Troy fell, and before the voyage of Jason's Argo, there lived a hero whose name was spoken with awe across the lands of Greece and Asia Minor. Bellerophon, master of Pegasus, slayer of the Chimera. His tale was one of triumph and hubris, of divine favor won and lost, a reminder that mortals who reach too high could fall as swiftly as they rose. Bellerophon was born in Corinth, son of Glaucus and grandson of Sisyphus, the cunning king who cheated death. Some whispered that Poseidon himself was his true father, for Bellerophon's fate seemed bound always to the sea god's power. From youth, he was handsome, noble, and gifted, excelling in the arts of war. Yet his life was shadowed by exile, for he shed blood. Whether by accident or design, the stories differ, and fled Corinth to seek purification at foreign courts. It was in his wanderings that he encountered the dream that would shape his destiny, the winged horse Pegasus, born from the blood of Medusa when Perseus struck off her head. The immortal steed was untamed, wild as the winds. Many longed to claim him, but none succeeded. Bellerophon, guided by a vision sent by Athena, sought the goddess's favor. In the temple, he prayed and sacrificed, and Athena appeared to him in a dream, giving him a golden bridle. With it, he approached Pegasus as the horse drank at the spring of Perine. At once the beast submitted, and Pegasus became his companion, carrying him through the skies like a bolt of lightning. This bond between man and winged horse brought Bellerophon to the service of King Proetus of Tiryns. But here, jealousy and treachery entwined with his fate. The queen, Stheneboia, desired him, but when he spurned her advances, she slandered him, claiming he had sought to dishonor her. Enraged, Proetus dared not kill his guest directly, for fear of the god's wrath, and instead sent him with sealed letters to his father-in-law, King Iobates of Lycia. The letters bore the command that Bellerophon should be slain, but Iobates, bound by the same laws of hospitality, would not stain his hands with his guest's blood. Instead, he sought to destroy him by impossible tasks, trusting that fate would accomplish what he could not. The first and greatest of these was the slaying of the Chimera, a beast born of the gods' nightmares. It had the body of a lion, the head of a goat rising from its back, and the tail of a serpent, and it breathed fire hotter than any forge. Entire armies had fallen before it, but Bellerophon, astride Pegasus, soared above its reach. Again and again he swooped down, striking with spear and bow, until at last he drove a lump of lead into its throat upon the tip of his spear. The chimera's fire melted the lead, which flowed into its belly and seared its innards, and the monster fell dead upon the plain. Iobates, astonished but still wary, sent Bellerophon against the Solymi, a fierce tribe of warriors. With Pegasus at his side, he triumphed. Next he faced the Amazons, the warrior women feared across the world, and again his skill and his winged steed carried him to victory. At last, Iobates even set ambushes of his own soldiers to kill the hero. But Bellerophon scattered them as though they were children. At last, seeing that this man could not be overcome, Iobates recognized him as favored by the gods and gave him his daughter's hand in marriage, along with half his kingdom. Bellerophon lived in honor and renown, ruling justly and with glory. But the seed of hubris had taken root. Victorious over monsters and armies alike, beloved of kings, master of Pegasus, Bellerophon grew proud. He began to believe himself worthy of the gods themselves. At last, in folly, he attempted the greatest blasphemy. He sought to ride Pegasus up to Olympus, to join the immortals in their eternal home. This the gods would not allow. Zeus sent a gadfly to sting Pegasus, and the winged horse reared in agony. Bellerophon was cast from the heavens, tumbling to earth. Some say he survived the fall, crippled and broken, wandering the land in misery. Others say he perished at once, his pride punished with death. Only Pegasus reached Olympus, where he became the bearer of Zeus's thunderbolts. Thus ended Bellerophon's tale. Once the slayer of the Chimera, the conqueror of armies, and the chosen of the gods, but undone by the arrogance of seeking what no mortal should. His story was a warning as much as a celebration, showing that even the greatest heroes must remember their place. Among the countless heroes of Greece, whose names resound with might and glory, one stands apart as both exceptional and rare. Atalanta, the swift-footed huntress. In a world where men most often bore the mantle of heroism, Atalanta proved that courage, strength, and honor knew no bounds of gender. Her tale is one of wilderness and contest, of the hunt and the chase, and of a spirit untamed by custom or expectation. Atalanta's origins were marked by hardship. She was the daughter of a king, some say of Arcadia, others of Boeotia, who, desiring a son, cast her aside at birth upon a mountainside. There, exposed to the elements, she would have perished had fate not intervened. A she-bear, sent by Artemis or driven by instinct, nursed the infant and guarded her until hunters discovered her and raised her as one of their own. Thus Atalanta grew in the wild, fleet as the deer and fierce as the beasts of the forest. From childhood she devoted herself to Artemis, goddess of the hunt and of chastity. She took the bow as her weapon, shunned the weaving of looms, and swore an oath to remain a maiden. Her beauty, fierce and radiant, attracted many suitors, but she spurned them all, desiring only the freedom of the hunt. Atalanta's fame spread across Greece when she joined in the hunt for the Caledonian boar. This monstrous beast had been sent by Artemis to ravage the land of Caledon after its king failed to honor her in sacrifice. The creature was vast, its tusks gleaming like ivory scythes, its roar shaking the earth. Warriors from every corner of Greece answered the call to slay it. Meleager of Calydon, Jason of the Argonauts, and many others. When Atalanta came among them, clad in a hunter's garb, bow in hand, the men murmured in discontent. A woman in their company seemed an affront to some, yet her skill soon silenced all doubt. During the hunt, as the bow thundered through the forest, scattering men and hounds alike, Atalanta was the first to strike it. Her arrow pierced its hide, drawing blood and enraging the beast. The warriors rallied, and at last Meleager drove his spear home, but he declared that the true honor belonged to Atalanta. As a token, he awarded her the bow's hide, the prize of victory. This gift, however, stirred strife. Meleager's uncles, enraged that a woman should claim such a prize, challenged her right. Meleager, in wrath, slew them, and this act brought ruin upon his own house, for his mother, grieving her brother's deaths, brought about his doom. Thus the Caledonian hunt, though victorious, was stained by tragedy. Yet Atalanta emerged from it with glory, her name spoken among the greatest hunters of Greece. Her fame did not end there. Atalanta also joined the Argonauts in their quest for the Golden Fleece, though some traditions omit her. In those tales, she sailed with Jason and the heroes, her skill with the bow a match for any. In others, she was denied a place, for some feared the presence of a woman among men at sea. Regardless, her association with that legendary voyage only heightened her renown. But Atalanta's most famous tale was of the foot race. Her beauty drew countless suitors, but bound by her oath and disdainful of marriage, she devised a contest. Any man who wished to win her hand must race her in a sprint. If he lost, he would forfeit his life. One after another, suitors tried, and one after another, they fell, slain by the swift-footed huntress who outran them with ease. Her speed was legendary, a gift of the gods themselves, and none could best her. At last came Hippomenes, also known as Melanion, who sought her hand not through strength, but through cunning. Before the race, he prayed to Aphrodite, goddess of love, who favored him and gave him 3 golden apples. When the contest began, Atalanta surged ahead as always, her stride as light as wind, but Hippomenes, with craft, cast down 1 golden apple. Its gleam drew her eye, and she bent to seize it, losing precious steps. Twice more he cast the apples, and twice she slowed to gather them. At last, Hippomenes crossed the finish line first. Bound by her vow, Atalanta became his bride. Yet their story did not end in harmony. Some say the two, overcome by passion, defiled a sacred temple, perhaps of Zeus, perhaps of Cybele. In anger, the gods transformed them into lions, yoked together, never again to know human form. Others say they lived out their lives as mortals, blessed but shadowed by divine displeasure. Whatever the ending, their tale reflected both the triumph and peril of love entangled with the will of the gods. Atalanta's legacy was unique. She was not a conqueror of kingdoms, nor a slayer of countless foes, but a figure who defied expectation, who stood as equal to any man. In her, the Greeks saw the wild freedom of the hunt, the beauty of swiftness, and the strength of one who owed her power not to lineage or kingship, but to herself and to the favor of Artemis. If many heroes embodied force, Atalanta embodied independence. She lived by her own vow, followed her own path, and proved that heroism belonged to any who had the courage to seize it. Her name endured not only in myth, but in the whispers of those who longed for a life unbound by the chains of tradition, as free and swift as the huntress who once outran every man in Greece. Not all heroes wielded sword or spear, nor did all triumph by strength of arm. Among the Greeks, there was one whose power lay not in battle, but in song. Orpheus, the poet of Thrace, whose music could charm beasts, bend the trees, and soften even the hearts of gods. His tale was not one of conquest or kingship, but of love, loss, and the eternal yearning of the soul. Orpheus was the son of the muse Calliope, mistress of epic song, and some say his father was Oeagrus, a Thracian king, while others claimed Apollo himself, god of music and prophecy, had sired him. From his mother, he inherited the gift of poetry, and from his divine lineage, the gift of the lyre. None could equal him in song. When Orpheus touched the strings, rivers paused in their courses to listen. Wild beasts lay at his feet in peace, and stones themselves seemed to move at his command. His fame spread across Greece, and it was for this reason that Jason summoned him to join the Argonauts in their voyage for the Golden Fleece. Among that company of mighty warriors, Heracles, Castor and Pollux, Peleus and others, Orpheus seemed out of place. Yet his music proved as great a weapon as any sword. When the ship approached the Isle of the Sirens, whose voices lured sailors to their doom, Orpheus took up his lyre and sang. His song rose above theirs, stronger and sweeter, drowning their fatal call. The Argonauts sailed safely past, saved not by strength but by harmony. Yet Orpheus's greatest tale was not of voyage or heroism, but of love. He wed Eurydice, a maiden of surpassing beauty. Their love was deep and true, but fate struck swiftly. As Eurydice walked through a meadow, she was bitten by a serpent and died. Stricken with grief, Orpheus could not accept her loss. Unlike other men, he did not resign himself to mourning. He resolved to descend into the realm of the dead itself to bring her back. With lyre in hand, Orpheus journeyed to the underworld, where no living man dared tread. Past the rivers of woe, past the shades of the dead, he came to the very throne of Hades and Persephone. There he played and sang of his love and his grief, his notes weaving sorrow so profound that all of Tartarus wept. The Furies themselves, who knew no pity, shed tears. Persephone's heart softened, and even stern Hades relented. They granted Orpheus a single chance. Eurydice would follow him back to the world of the living, but on one condition. He must not look back upon her until both had reached the upper air. With hope and dread mingling in his heart, Orpheus ascended the path. Behind him came Eurydice, silent as a shadow. The way was long, and doubt gnawed at him. Was she truly there, or had Hades deceived him? At last, as they neared the threshold of light, fear overcame him. He turned to see her, and in that instant, she vanished, drawn back into the darkness, forever beyond his reach. Orpheus cried out, but it was too late. Once more, he sought to follow her, but the gates of the underworld remained closed. He had lost her, not by death alone, but by his own weakness, his failure to trust. From that day, Orpheus wandered the earth in grief, shunning the love of women and devoting himself only to song. Some say he turned his devotion to Apollo and the heavens, rejecting all else. Others say he was torn apart by Maenads, followers of Dionysus, enraged by his disdain. His severed head, still singing, was cast into the river Hebrus and carried to the sea, where it came to rest on the Isle of Lesbos, destined to become a place sacred to poetry and music. Orpheus's legacy was not the slaying of monsters or the building of cities, but the proof that music could move even the divine. His song revealed the power of art and love to move even the dead, though his tale ended in loss. His name became synonymous with poetry itself, a reminder that song can transcend time, bridging the mortal and the eternal. Among the founders of cities and dynasties, few were as storied as Cadmus, the man who brought the alphabet to Greece and built the city of Thebes. His tale was one of exile and destiny, of dragon's blood and divine wrath, of a life marked both by triumph and sorrow. Cadmus was not only a hero of deeds, but a civilizer, one whose legacy would shape generations. He was a prince of Phoenicia, son of King Agenor and Queen Telephassa, and brother to Europa, whose beauty caught the eye of Zeus. Disguised as a bull, the king of gods carried her across the sea to Crete. And when she vanished, Agenor commanded his sons to seek her and not return until she was found. Thus Cadmus set out, wandering far and wide in search of his sister, yet never finding her, for her fate was forever bound to Zeus. In his wandering, Cadmus sought guidance from the oracle of Delphi. The Pythia told him to abandon the quest for Europa and instead follow a sacred cow, marked by a half-moon on its flank. Where the cow lay down, there he was to build a city. Obedient to the will of Apollo, Cadmus followed the animal until it came to rest in the plain of Boeotia. There he prepared to sacrifice it in thanks. But when his men went to fetch water from a nearby spring, they did not return. Cadmus discovered that the spring was guarded by a monstrous serpent, a child of Ares, whose coils crushed men and whose fangs dripped with venom. Alone, Cadmus took up his spear and fought the beast. Long they struggled, man against dragon, until at last Cadmus slew it, driving his blade through its head and pinning it to the earth. As he stood over his fallen foe, the voice of Athena reached him. She commanded him to sow the dragon's teeth into the ground. Obedient, he scattered them across the soil, and from each tooth sprang up armed warriors, the Spartoi, fierce and full-grown. They raised their weapons against him, and Cadmus feared he would be slain. But again, Athena guided him. He cast a stone among them, and at once they turned upon one another, fighting in confusion, until only 5 remained. These survivors swore loyalty to Cadmus, and from them descended the noble families of Thebes. Yet though Cadmus had triumphed, his slaying of the dragon carried a heavy price. Ares, whose child he had killed, demanded penance. For 8 years Cadmus served the god, enduring his wrath. In time, he was forgiven, and as reward, he was given Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, as his bride. Their wedding was a gathering of gods themselves, and among the gifts they received was a necklace wrought by Hephaestus, glittering with divine beauty. But this necklace, though splendid, carried with it a curse that would haunt their descendants, bringing sorrow and ruin to the house of Thebes. Cadmus ruled Thebes with wisdom, and the city flourished. He was revered not only for founding it, but for bringing with him the letters of the Phoenicians, teaching the Greeks the art of writing, which became the foundation of their literature and history. In this, Cadmus was not merely a warrior, but a bringer of knowledge, a figure who bound myth to civilization. Yet the gods are seldom generous without bitterness. Though Cadmus lived long and prospered, his later years were marked by grief. His daughters were ensnared in tragic fates. Semele, beloved of Zeus, perished when she beheld him in his glory. Ino was driven mad by Hera and cast herself into the sea. Agave, in frenzy, slew her own son Pentheus, mistaking him for a beast. Thus the house of Cadmus, blessed at its founding, was cursed in its line. At last, weary of sorrow, Cadmus and Harmonia left Thebes. Some say they journeyed to Illyria, where Cadmus became king and fought in distant wars. Others tell that overwhelmed by the weight of the gods' punishments, they prayed for release. In answer, they were transformed into serpents, their bodies coiling together for eternity. And in this form, they were said to dwell in the Elysian fields. Cadmus's tale stood apart from those of warriors like Heracles or Achilles. His glory was not in endless conquest, but in creation. The founding of Thebes, the gift of letters, the weaving of a legacy that endured beyond his own life. Yet his story also carried the shadow of divine vengeance, a reminder that no mortal, however noble, could escape the will of the gods. In Cadmus, the Greeks saw both the promise and peril of civilization itself. He tamed the wild, built walls where once there was wilderness, and gave men the gift of letters. Yet in so doing, he also brought upon himself the weight of curses that flowed down through generations. His life was a testament to the power of destiny, the mingling of triumph with sorrow, and the enduring mark of a single man upon the course of history. The stories of the 10 great heroes, Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, Jason, Achilles, Odysseus, Bellerophon, Atalanta, Orpheus, and Cadmus, together form a mosaic of Greek myth, a tapestry woven with strength and sorrow, triumph and tragedy. Each stood apart in their own way, embodying different virtues, different struggles, and different destinies. Yet when their tales are set side by side, a greater pattern emerges. A vision of heroism as the Greeks imagined it, at once glorious and perilous, immortal in memory, though fragile in life. Heracles, strongest of all men, bore the weight of divine punishment through labors that tested not only his body, but his soul. Perseus, with wit and courage, conquered the monstrous Medusa and founded dynasties. Theseus carved order from chaos, uniting Athens and slaying the Minotaur in the depths of the labyrinth. Jason, though marked by tragedy, gathered the greatest company of heroes ever known in the quest for the Golden Fleece. Achilles, swift and fiery, chose glory over life, embodying the terrible brilliance of martial valor. Odysseus, by contrast, endured with cunning and resilience, his tale a hymn to perseverance and the long road home. Bellerophon soared higher than any mortal before him, only to be cast down by hubris, a warning to all who would seek the realm of the gods. Atalanta, swift-footed and untamed, stood as proof that heroism was not the province of men alone, but of any who dared to defy expectation. Orpheus the poet triumphed not by steel, but by song, revealing the power of love and art to move even the dead, though his tale ended in loss. And Cadmus, the founder, left a legacy that outlived him in stone and word, his Thebes standing as a monument to both human endeavor and divine curse. In these heroes, the Greeks explored every dimension of what it meant to strive beyond the ordinary. Some triumphed through strength, others through cleverness, others through beauty of spirit. Yet none escaped the hand of fate. Even the mightiest were touched by tragedy, for the Greeks knew that greatness and suffering were bound together, that to rise high was also to risk the fall. These tales, sung by bards and etched in stone, were not meant as simple entertainments, but as mirrors. In Heracles, men saw endurance against hardship. In Achilles, the price of wrath. In Odysseus, the unyielding will to return. In Orpheus, the eternal grief of love lost. Through them, the Greeks grappled with questions of mortality, destiny, hubris, and honor. Questions that remain as pressing now as they were in the days of Homer and Hesiod. The heroes did not live forever, but their stories did. Their names passed from lips to lyres, from poets to playwrights, from temples to theaters. They became ideals, warnings, and inspirations all at once. And in this way, they achieved what no mortal flesh could: immortality in memory. To speak of Greek heroes, then, is to speak of the human condition itself, of striving and failing, of hope and despair, of glory and ruin. Each tale is unique, but together they echo a single truth: that to live as a hero is to live in the tension between mortality and eternity. The heroes shone brightly, some for long, some for short, but all left behind a light that has not dimmed, even across the centuries. Thus ends the great cycle of their deeds. But in every telling, in every retelling, their voices live again, reminding us that though men may perish, the spirit of heroism endures forever. And for those who want to continue exploring stories like this, be sure to check out our channel for more content on mythologies from all over the world. You're also invited to subscribe, like, and share this video to anyone, anywhere. Each action helps the channel grow and ensures more people can join in the journey.